has crashed into the World Trade Center. We don't know anything more than that.
We don't fully know the details. There is one report that a plane has hit of the World Trade Center.
Nobody move. Everything stay quiet. 93 checking in 350, 93 350. 93 on traffic deals 1 o'clock 12 miles eastbound 370. Negative contact.
Jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess, because they're trying to save themselves.
It's winter, it's black, it's iron. These young men, we're not ready to die. I'm pissed. Oh, God!
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. The leadership of Al-Qaeda has great influence in Afghanistan and supports the Taliban regime in controlling most of that country. The Taliban must hand over the terrorists or they will share in their fate.
Special operators and the Brits pinned Osama bin Laden.
Very top up there where bin Laden's hanging out.
Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda. We know he's been developing weapons of mass destruction.
The president is right to the threat of weapons of mass destruction.
Rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden.
But, I just don't spend that much time on it. Leader of Iraq is an evil man. He gassed his own people.
Iraq had nothing to do with this.
What I do oppose is a dumb war.
Saddam must leave Iraq. Refusal to do so will result in military conflict.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The UK military presence will continue.
More than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. We thought he had weapons of mass destruction. Turns out he didn't. The people of Afghanistan, we will continue to stand with you.
We are at war. Now you too will taste the reality of this situation.
Our determination to defend our values is greater than their determination to cause death and destruction to innocent people.
Withdrawing before our commanders tell us would be dangerous.
Ending this war. We will kill bin Laden. We will crush Al-Qaeda.
The United States will lead.
I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war.
We don't make these sacrifices for territory. We do it because it's right.
I can report to the American people and to the world. The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
The United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
The United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth. In itself, this goes a long way to explaining the things it does around the world. At present, it's conducting a war on terror, or more accurately, a campaign against opposition to US domination. Others prefer to call it the beginnings of the Third World War. The United States has an insatiable appetite for conflict, and since going into Korea in the 1950s, it's been at war with someone or other in some corner of the globe non-stop right up to the present day. This drive is now led by the weapons manufacturers themselves. It is a highly dangerous precedent. I call it war corporatism. It is the door of a new fascism being pushed open. And don't be fooled, not all fascism looks like Adolf Hitler. The reality, as we see from the Iraqi invasion, is that the presidency has been captured by the most powerful elements of this corporatism. And this ghastly molecule aims to turn the world into its very own enslaved global market, and the plan is well underway. The attack by Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center is just one response to it. Is this a conspiracy? Quite the opposite. It is a high-profile project known as the Project for the New American Century. People like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl are the major players among politicians, right-wing thinkers, militarists and industrialists in the creation of the project. The project is a neoconservative manifesto which includes in its toolbox the unbridled use of war in clearing a path for US interests. The will to attack Iraq came entirely from this visible yet sinister group. September the 11th was merely the pretext. Bush is merely the figurehead. And so, who's next, you wonder? Iran? North Korea? France? Britain? None of us really matter to them.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington, and joining us again is David Swanson. He's the co-founder of AfterDowningstreet.org. He's the author of Daybreak, Undoing the Imperial Presidency, and his new book is War is a Lie. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
So we talked a few days ago about your book, and we talked mostly about the lie side. Right. Now let's talk a little bit more about why America goes to war, particularly now in the historical period we're living in. You mentioned in the last interview the Project for New American Century, which kind of lays out this vision. So dig into that a bit.
When you tell people this is a lie, that is a lie, they inevitably come up with, well, then why did we really go? And they want one answer, and it's always a range of several answers, and even then, you don't quite explain it with rational reasons. Wars that don't make sense, that are doomed to failure, wars where you see the private meeting notes of these guys sitting around together trying to come up with a reason why they want to go to a war they've already determined to go into, and then coming up with a reason to tell the public is a second step
what are you talking
beyond
about
that.
when you say reading the notes? Where have you read the notes?
Well, in particular, there's a nice example in the book from the Vietnam War of Vietnam War planners talking about what reason they should themselves believe in to keep the war going and escalate it. It having been just predetermined that they're going to do that, knowing full well and themselves predicting that it would accomplish nothing and just be a matter of time, how much blood, how much treasure. But then after they decide on why they want the war, they decide on why they should tell the public they want the war, sort of a second step. And so there are irrational drives that need to be looked at for why we have these wars that I also go into in the book, including going into...
So talk about the Pnac document. Pnac being Project for New American Century.
The Project for the New American Century, which is a think tank that was around in the 90s and up through 2005 or 6, and then it disappeared, and then came back online in 2009 when the coast was clear and clearly nobody was getting prosecuted for anything. And there are about 17 members of this so-called think tank who were in top positions in the Bush-Cheney administration, advisor to the president, to the vice president, assistant secretary of defense, and so forth. And a couple of these guys, Feith and Wolfowitz, had earlier worked for Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and put out a paper that advocated the same kind of program that they then put out papers from Pnac advocating, that is intense nationalism and militarism and going after Middle Eastern states with aggressive wars. And this is what Pnac urged on President Bill Clinton, who agreed with them and made regime change in Iraq one of his goals.
And I think this is very significant, that this Pnac document, although it was mostly Republicans, I believe Lieberman was a supporter of it, if not a signer of it. But Clinton agreed with one of its main propositions, that there are certainly sections of the Democratic Party that are on board with this vision.
Right, and there are several key papers that they published, and the biggest one maybe was in 2000 called Rebuilding America's Defenses, as if they needed to somehow be rebuilt, which was advocating a much larger military, the ability to fight multiple simultaneous wars, an aggressive agenda of going after nations in key regions of American interest, including resource regions, the need to plunder other people's resources, and a lot of it is language about absolute dominance and maintaining control of the world and fending off any possible rival. This is in the shadows of the Cold War having ended and the need existing for some new enemy, and they haven't quite come up with international terrorism or Al-Qaeda yet to fill that gap, but they want to take this opportunity to maintain American dominance.
And get rid of regimes that have gone like this. So you can't have any that have left the U.S. sphere of influence. So Saddam in Iraq, but you also then have Iran, and it's a series of Syria. And see, you have to either be in our sphere of influence or you're not going to be.
Right, and you look at what Wesley Clark said about the list of nations that Donald Rumsfeld had, 7 nations we were going to go into in 5 years if the Iraqi people hadn't fought back, I guess.
No, I think it's very important that this issue of that there's a significant section of the Democratic Party leadership either shares this vision or does not abhor it. For example, while Lieberman supported this document, and Lieberman gets chosen as Al Gore's vice president. So there's a whole section here they're more or less on the same page.
There are a lot of factors in that pick, I think, maybe the biggest being Al Gore's pretense that he had never met Bill Clinton and was buddies with one of Clinton's attackers. But I agree that the Democratic Party does not have a vision that is dramatically different from this.
So how about President Obama? He runs in the campaign promising a new mindset on foreign policy. Do you see any indication that Obama has a fundamentally different view than the Pnac document?
Yeah, he talked in the campaign, at least on occasion, about ending the mindset that allows war. Then he went and gave a Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech glorifying war and maintaining that Martin Luther King Jr. had been wrong in his Peace Prize acceptance speech, which if a Republican had done it, we'd still be hearing the outrage. And this is someone who gave an Oval Office speech a couple of months back where he regurgitated all of the lies that Bush had told about these wars, about Iraq, starting back with the weapons of mass destruction on through the lies about the surge that are being used to justify the continuation and escalation in Afghanistan. So there is a problem with the Democrats buying in to the same lies that you get from the Republicans.
Now, one of the arguments that's given is that you can't really talk about the real geopolitics because, one, people won't understand it, and two, maybe they won't support the policy, but it makes the most sense. And I'll give you an example. One of the reasons given for being in Afghanistan, which is not talked about publicly, is that the U.S. is acting as a kind of a buffer between Pakistan and India, that India will not stomach another pro-Pakistani government in Kabul, and that if the Taliban are to come back to power and Pakistan is allowed to have this influence again in Afghanistan, you could instigate another India-Pakistan conflict. So what you need to, so the U.S., the real reason for the United States being there is really about the disintegration of Pakistan and the possibilities of war, two nuclear powers having a fight over Afghanistan. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think we're encouraging the disintegration of Pakistan, and I think if we were concerned about a conflict, we wouldn't be selling weapons to India. You ought to want a conflict with fewer weapons in it, if that were your concern. And I think that the secrets are not really that deeply buried. There's an incident in the book I describe of an interaction between myself and Mr. Brzezinski, who you like to cite, and who spelled out his reasons in a Rand Corporation affair for why we need to stay in Afghanistan, including reasons like a gas pipeline that aren't talked about endlessly on television, but that are openly stated at events like that, and concern about, buffering a war. No, if you look at what these people say in NATO meetings, and there's one happening right now, it's about the irresistible temptation of being able to put bases and weapons, including nuclear weapons, in a country that borders just about every critical country they want to face off against in the world. And Afghanistan is in that location. And knowing full well that it's hopeless and it's a question of how much blood, how much treasure before they pull out, they just can't help themselves. I don't think it's about preventing wars. I think it's about dominating the globe.
Thanks for joining us.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the budget analyst office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, Pnac, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes in the buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of the incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission. Because ignorance is strength.